Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we focus on real Canadian rugby. I'm Stu Hardy, joined as always by Derek Brissett. Derek, it was the bye week for the Arrows, so there was at least one Canadian rugby game that wasn't happening, but we also had the Canada Sevens as well going on in Vancouver. So, a bit of MLR action on the Rugby Network, a bit of Sevens action on the CBC. How are you able to balance it all?
Yeah, I mean, good rugby weekend. The Canada Sevens, it's obviously a huge event on the Canadian rugby calendar. Both teams kind of put in some pretty good showings. There was definitely some big wins, some losses along the way, unfortunately, but solid showing as they both try to climb the series ladder there. The MLR, interesting MLR viewing this weekend. Obviously, the Arrows had the bye week, but so did the Free Jacks. So essentially, over half the Canadians in the league out of action this week. So it's a bit of a break for us, I guess, on the viewing. Couple teams only starting guys on the bench, but or only playing guys on the bench. Did that. The Saracens lost, so that was sad. Beyond that, though, it's been a wild sports week. F1's back. Hockey post trade deadline playoff push is starting. I think we mentioned last episode. It's probably arguably the best time of the year to be a sports fan. So feels like there's just so much going on with rugby. Are the Ospreys merging and moving to London? What's going on there? Like, how sad are you right now?
So this is the thing. I'm sad that the Ospreys lost by 1 point because they scored a try in the corner, and of course that's the most difficult angle to get a conversion. But at the same time, this whole thing going on with Ealing and Ospreys apparently merging is that Ealing's basically tried to get into the Premiership, but their ground size is only 5,000. And
so let's go play in Wales instead.
It seems as though they want to be. I think they're changing their name anyway to like London Trailfinders. I think that's just for like branding opportunities more than anything else. And they had approached teams in the URC about a possible merger, one of which is the Ospreys. But when you come into like the literal geopolitics of this, so any team that's in England is under the authority of the RFU, and any team in Wales is under the authority of the WRU. So the question is like, is this new merger team, are they going to play for the Premiership or are they going to play for the URC? And if they're going to play for the URC, they can't play in England because the RFU says if you play in England, you can't play for a non-RFU approved competition. And so if they're let's say, they want to play in the Premiership. Okay, then you have to do another year in the Championship, and you still have to find a ground that has 10,001 seats for it to happen. So the alternative would be, okay, so let's move Ealing to the Ospreys in Swansea. They can use the Swansea.com stadium and play in the URC then. It's like, okay, so why are they called London Trailfinders? So I think this is all like people putting on tinfoil hats, conspiracy theories moving around. Again, none of the teams like the RFU, WRU, the Ospreys, and Ealing Trailfinders, no one's confirmed or denied anything, because if there is something going on, then it is all just hush hush at the moment, legal requirements. But I think personally that this is, people wearing tinfoil hats and saying that, this is going on because, the WRU is up a certain creek without a certain instrument, and Ealing is desperate to get into top flight rugby. But like legally, it doesn't make any sense.
I was to say, so ultimately what you're saying is we have no idea what's going on.
Absolutely. Welcome to
perfect.
Rugby.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, perfect. I'm on the same page. No clue.
Anyway, let's move on to the actual content of the episode. Now, normally this is the part where we talk about the Arrows game, but as we mentioned before, this is a bye week. So we don't have that game to talk about. However, we do have an interview coming up later in this episode of the podcast, where we have two very special guests, but we'll get to that later. Let's talk about the other MLR games that happened this weekend, because there were 5 games going on. First up, we had Dallas versus Seattle. Seattle undefeated so far, and they basically continued their winning streak. The final score, Dallas 10, Seattle 35. Then we move back to the East, where we have Atlanta versus NOLA, the only Saturday game, which is interesting in my opinion. After falling to Seattle, Atlanta returned home. NOLA had a great start, but Atlanta saw it out. The final score, Atlanta 29, NOLA 16. On Sunday, for the first game, we had our first ever visit to SeatGeek Stadium as Chicago hosted Utah. This was a defensive encounter by both teams, one for the purists, as they say. The final score, Chicago 10, Utah 14. Then we move down to Texas, where we have Houston hosting San Diego. Both teams unbeaten at this point. So basically, someone was going to get their first loss of the season. A very close encounter, bonus points divvied out for both teams. The final score, Houston 31, San Diego 26. And finally, we had a battle in the East as New York hosted DC. And if you thought the Arrows result was bad, then DC joined the club. Final score, New York 34, DC 8.
Yeah, it's almost like New York's good or something, eh?
It's like New York is good when they're at home and they don't have to, go somewhere else across the country or across the border to prove that. It's so weird. Huh. Who'd have thunk it?
Bizarre.
Were there any games that stood out for you, Derek?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple. If we're talking, Canadian performances, Nakai Penny, gotta give him a shout out. He had a try, a handful of tackles, looked really good at the breakdown. In Seattle's win over Dallas, he's the lone Canadian on the team of the week. Houston, San Diego was a big one as well. But I think, to me, the most interesting game of the weekend to me, I think, was Atlanta NOLA.
Okay.
Not necessarily the best game, but I think the most interesting one. So we got Matt Heaton versus Eric Howard in this one, and it's just like, what's going on with NOLA, man? It's such an interesting, feels like such an interesting team right now, because I think we spent a lot of time in the offseason, a lot of MLR media out there, NOLA looked like really heavily improved, right? They signed Dougie Fife, they signed Rodney Iona at fly half from the Brumby, from the Brumby, Super Rugby fly half coming over, Tom Florence coming over, Luke Campbell. They signed a lot of really big names. A lot of their big guns came back, like Cam Dolan, JP Duplessis, they all returned, right? That big core of the team. And everyone was like, this has been a team that has been on the cusp of the playoffs basically every year of their existence.
Yeah.
Right? And it seemed like this is really going to be, with the roster that they assembled this year, really looked like, hey, this could be the push to jump up, right? And they're 0-3 to start the season, right? Yeah. Now, granted, I mean, they're 0-3. They've played New England, who a lot of people have positioned at the top of prediction-wise, preseason predictions. A lot of people think was one of the best teams. Then they played Houston, who's one of the two undefeated teams left. Again, a team predicted to be at the top of their conference. They lost to Atlanta, and they got New York this week. So it's things are not getting any easier for NOLA.
No.
Yet they have that playoff aspirations. I think that's probably still there, but they started this game so well, but then penalties just killed them. Penalties penalties, there's lack of execution. I mean, the same thing that brings down pretty much every rugby team ever to be on the losing side of a game. But like they had some opportunities there, but it was just, after getting off to a lead, such a great start, it was just like if you're a Nola Gold fan, you have to be incredibly frustrated, I think, with the start of this season.
Yeah.
Because you got New York this week, who, as you just mentioned, Stu, putting up some big numbers on some teams. Right. So it's like they're looking very good. It is in New Orleans, so maybe that's a little bit of a help to them. But yeah, I don't know. It's this seems like an interesting little story to follow. There's one of the, I guess, what seemed to be a projected playoff team getting off to an 0-3 start. And then going into next week has to play one of the defending champs and one of the best teams in the league. So it's a rough go for any team to recover from for that has some playoff aspirations to start the season. Anything jump out to you over the last week? Canadian performances?
So the game that I want to talk about is Chicago versus Utah. First of all, brand new venue, great turnout over. Let me get the numbers correct. I believe it was 4,443 people tickets sold for that game. Just one more and it would have been all fours, but you can't have everything. At the same time, so Lindsay Stevens and Emerson Pryor were the only Canadian representatives for each team. Stevens came on very early because of Hugh Roach going down with a twisted knee. So instead of coming on at at the 60th minute, he came on at like the 10th, and was very impressive from his drives, especially in the scrum. Emerson Pryor, he came on about early in the second half, around like the 50th minute mark. But then in a display of poor tackle form, he did a no-arms tackle. He had been warned earlier. And so he got yellow carded, which obviously not the best representation for Canada, but you grow, you learn, you get better. But this was I think it was a good game. There was like great defensive structure, as I mentioned, but it was also a bit of a frustrating game as well, because you could have said, oh, Chicago should have like kicked for posts a few more times. Utah should have been able to capitalize with their experience in locating gaps in the defense. Opportunities not taken, but it was a very engaging game. Luke Carty becoming the first player to score at SeatGeek Stadium for the Hounds. Strum, the pub quiz answer of which is the first Chicago player to score at home in a try. So always good. But it is, again, things of you're seeing, and it's Chicago, the same with NOLA. They were unable to score in the second half, and that inevitably led to their downfall. And it's a lot of things like what could have been. But from like a Canadian perspective, great to see Lindsay Stevens take to the field for practically the entirety of the game. Obviously, we wish it was like he was starting, and we wish it was under better circumstances, but stepped up at hooker and really delivered. Emerson Pryor able to come on for the I'd say 19 of those 20 minutes. He was doing a pretty good job, and it was just the final no-arms tackle that unfortunately denied us extra 10 minutes to see his performance. But especially in Chicago, climate similar to Ontario, a great turnout of rugby fans, because obviously, from what I've gathered, SeatGeek Stadium isn't really on a transit line. I don't think it's on like a subway line. I think it's on a bus route. So people were able to bus in there, and there's obviously like a parking lot as well. But for over 4,000 people turning for your season opener, I think that's a great turnout and strong confidence in this team. Especially as the weather gets warmer, we'll definitely see a lot more turnouts. But those, so especially Stevens, that was my Canadian performance of the week to watch.
Well, Chicago obviously going to be an interesting team too, because that's they play the Arrows next week, second game at SeatGeek Stadium. Both teams being 0-2, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to have obviously both teams looking for a win.
Yeah, both teams looking for a win. Look and watch it turn into a draw, or something like that.
Hey, you know what? Those are points. Those are points.
Yeah.
We'll take that.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
We'll take that. I think the other super noteworthy thing too, going into this, the New York Ironworkers pretty handily beat DC. Andrew Coe is among some of the league leaders in ball carries and meters, so shout out to him. He's playing very well to start the season. With this game and the game last week against the Toronto Arrows, the New York Ironworkers right now are sitting, on top of the Eastern Conference, but they've also only allowed 11 points in the last 2 games. So they're 2 wins. Yeah. They've only given up 11 points. So that could be a potentially scary proposition if they keep playing that way. So it's it's kind of interesting to see how teams kind of feel each other out. Early bye weeks for everybody. I think we might need the proper check-in after everybody plays 4 games, little quarter way mark, but it's kind of interesting to sort of see like the storylines and how the season seems to be developing, and then who looks like there'll be some Shield contenders coming out of each conference early on too.
Yeah, absolutely. Great stuff to go on, even if the Arrows aren't playing. But as you mentioned, there may not have been any rugby action going on in Toronto, but that doesn't mean there wasn't anything going on across Canada, because in Vancouver, it was the Canada Sevens. And for the first time ever, the men's and women's were held at the same location, BC Place. So the action started on Friday. So we'll go over the men's and then we'll go over the women's. So the men's sevens, they opened with a 35-3 loss to Ireland. Which is bad, but considering they didn't score anything against Ireland in the pool stages in LA, it's an improvement. Then came the big win, which was a 29-12 win over Australia to close out Friday action. So that's obviously a bit of a boost. And then finally a 35-7 win over Chile. And it's really unfortunate because I think Australia also had the win over Chile and Ireland. So it was basically a case of Ireland, Australia, and Canada all had 2 wins. But it was then on points difference that Ireland, Australia went through to the cup final, and Canada went to the 9th place knockout round. And in that round, they started with a 14-19 loss to Spain, and then followed by a 31-14 loss to South Africa. That meant they finished 13th at the Canada Sevens. That means they are currently still in 14th in the standings, and they are 15 points from safety. So 15 points away from this elimination tournament that will be happening in London in 4 rounds' time. One team that doesn't have to worry about elimination round are the women's sevens. So they opened in a game against Ireland as well, and unfortunately a loss. So 28-7 was the result. Then they followed up with a 17-12 loss to the USA before scoring a 31-7 win over Brazil. They proceeded to the knockout rounds with a 10-5 loss to the Black Ferns. And then they redeemed themselves with a 24-12 win over Ireland before finally concluding their Canada Sevens with a 22-17 loss to Fiji. That means they finished 6th in the overall standings, and they are currently 8th in the tournament standings. So, a decent performance for the women's sevens team. Great to see that they're playing at BC Place as well. Yeah, but it's getting a bit tight for the men's sevens to try and turn this around and get out of the elimination zone, really.
Yeah, I mean, I thought overall it was a pretty solid tournament for them. Obviously, that win against Australia was unreal.
Yeah,
So that's
absolutely.
up.
Yeah.
That's the highlight, right? I think like you kind of said, maybe a little unlucky with some point differential stuff that bumped them out of the out of the cup. But I think overall pretty promising. I mean, even that it's like they end up in the they end up in the like the consolation. They have to play South Africa for some reason.
Yeah.
So it's a little
Yeah. Yeah.
unlucky with the
Yes. Say what you want about Canada. If they're facing like the
uh,
blitz box for
yeah,
what was it
for
11th place, then
yeah,
something's
exactly.
really gone wrong.
Yeah, that's so that's interesting, right? So it's a bit of the schedule maybe didn't work out too well in their favor for this one, but obviously still in that like playoff zone, which I mean might not be the best spot to be in, but as long as the team kind of keeps getting better, it does. At the end of the day, you do get to play for that spot, right? So at the end of the day, it's just anything can happen when you actually have to play for it, right? So when it comes
Yeah.
down to that, it's going to be just a couple of games for when they have to do that playoff, right? So it's really important to keep improving, and I think they showed that a little bit this weekend, which was which is hopeful and exciting. Some good performances across the board.
Yeah, but this is the thing. If Canada had made the like cup quarterfinals,
Yeah.
because of the way ranking, they would have at least finished with 10 points. And instead, because they finished 15th, they only leave with one. And if they're 15 points away, then they just need to like overcome their
Yeah.
opposition.
Yeah.
Is it well, that's it. If they face South Africa again, hopefully, I mean, like, a team that was like
I,
competing for 13th, then yeah, absolutely they should be able to turn that around.
I
But I understand it's like
yeah.
it's not just the idea of like, oh, Canada's gotten worse, it's all these other nations have gotten better, as um we've explained before.
Yeah.
Now it's an Olympic sport. A lot of unions are thankfully investing in their sevens teams and want to keep their teams in the World Series. And as much as I'd rather, I understand like, oh, if you're playing for the spot, you still have the chance to get it.
Yeah.
I personally prefer to like not have to
Yeah. Yeah.
worry about that, but
Yeah. Well,
and
I
that's
think
the thing. So,
yeah.
so
I do agree with you. I just think as long as if you are improving and stuff, like you said, it's like they kind of missed out on the cup, maybe due to a point differential.
yeah,
But when it comes to that playoff as well, point differential is not necessarily going to matter. It's just if you win or lose, right? So
yeah.
as long as you
I
win at
well
that
that
point, win when it matters. It's
well the decision is
how many
made
more
of.
tournaments are there?
So there are for the men there are four more tournaments.
Okay,
So they
okay,
have
okay.
a second go at Hong Kong, which will include the women as well. Then they have Singapore, Toulouse, which will include the women, with the final being in London. So it's basically at the conclusion of the Toulouse tournament, that is when it's decided of the teams that will be facing in this relegation playoff in London. So now's the time, guys. You
Yeah,
got
that'll be
about
wild.
3 weeks until Hong Kong. I
No,
don't, I
no,
don't, I don't want to rush you, but
yeah.
hurry up.
The wins over Australia and Chile were very encouraging this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. But
Yeah. Hopefully
yeah,
hopefully they keep rolling with that.
yeah, I'm
Team
hoping for
vibes.
that too. I'm hoping the momentum's with the team and that they can, you know, obviously they played in Hong Kong earlier in the first leg. They did, they actually scored their highest position to get to take away 7 points, and all they need to do now is just get 2 wins and get that point differential up in the pool stage, and they'll be leaving with an automatic 10. And if they can do that a couple more times, then hey, they should be in the clear, like ahead of Uruguay, and we won't need to be worrying about this anymore. But
Yeah.
as we said, that is still yet to come. The Hong Kong Sevens will be taking place in the 31st of March through to the 2nd of April.
Yeah.
Right. Let's not look too far forward into the future. Let's instead look ahead to the MLR round 4 predictions that will be happening this coming weekend. So first up, Derek, we have New England versus DC. Who are you taking?
New England. Let's get all the Canadian boys back on the pitch for this game. So New England.
Yeah.
No disrespect to all the Canadians that are also on DC, but New England.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a numbers game, as in like DC only have 3 Canadians, New England have 3 in their backs alone. So I'm going to agree with you as well. I think DC, they were hit hard in that game with New York. New England coming off a bye week. It's their home opener as well. So I think the wind is definitely in New England's sails. Chicago versus Toronto. I'm going to go on a limb here, Derek, and say that you're going to pick Toronto.
That would be correct. Yeah.
All right. I am picking Toronto as well. So let's move. What a shock indeed. Okay, so San Diego are heading back home to Snapdragon Stadium, and they will be facing Dallas. Who have you got, Derek?
Well, Stu, wasn't this one of your predictions that Dallas would get a win in the first 4 games? One of your preseason predictions, right?
That was my preseason prediction that they would not lose.
Oh, okay. So you're thinking a draw might be on, because I'm looking at this. I'm like, San Diego's been pretty damn good, man.
I know they have been pretty damn good, and Dallas has pretty not. But
I feel like you have to back up your preseason prediction in this game.
You picked Dallas last week, so I will pick Dallas this week.
I will take San Diego this week.
Okay, that may be the correct answer, but we now have 2 undefeated teams in Seattle versus Houston. This will probably be the game of the week.
Yeah, this is definitely the game.
All right. So Seattle are hosting this game.
Mm-hmm.
But Houston have their first win was away from home as well. Seattle able to get a win away from home. Both of their away games, both against Dallas. So make of that what you will. Who have you got?
Dallas has had a bit of a tough schedule to start the year too, with Seattle, Houston, now San Diego. That's fun, but I think I'm gonna go with Houston. I'll take the road team in this one for. I think Houston. I don't know. Houston just looks like they might be one of the best teams in the league this year. So I'm looking for them to make a bit of a statement this week.
All right, that's fair. Well, if we're going on the number of Canadians, Houston only have 1. Rob Povey, who's always on the bench. I think he needs to be starting, really. But Seattle have 2 in their midst. And, once they start in Nakai Penny, and he makes the MLR 15 of the week. So I will therefore go with Seattle. And hopefully that will mean that I at least get a win if Dallas versus San Diego doesn't work out in my favor. And the final game is NOLA versus New York, held at the Gold Mine on Airline.
Oh, man. See, I feel like New York's the better team, but I feel like NOLA has to win this game. Like, is it weird to call games must-win games in week 4? Like, is that weird? Because I feel like this is a must-win game for NOLA. Like, if you're going to make the playoffs, if you're going to have that aspiration,
you got to get the momentum coming to you.
You got to start it somewhere, yeah.
I'm
going to, and for that reason, and they're at home, I'm going to go with NOLA.
Okay, I think that New York are going to win, but I also think NOLA are going to push them, if not defensively with a losing bonus point. Then they are finally going to get their attack in order and get those 4 tries to get that bonus point for them. So I'm going to go with New York, but I'm hoping that NOLA can actually get some points on the board, or the table board at least. But those are our picks. So those games again are New England versus DC, Chicago versus Toronto, San Diego versus Dallas, Seattle versus Houston, and NOLA versus New York. And you can watch all those games if you're in Canada on the Rugby Network. However, if you're looking to watch the Arrows game, you can also watch that on tsn.ca, TSN Plus, and the TSN app. On top of that, back in Europe, we have the return of the final 2 rounds of the Six Nations, and you can watch those on DAZN. Okay, Derek, so we've talked about what we normally talk about, but now we are cutting away to the big part of this podcast, a big interview, and it's coming up in 3, 2, 1. And we are back. And as promised, we have 2 special guests joining us for the remainder of the podcast. The big head honchos within the Toronto Arrows at the moment. We have the president and general partner, Bill Webb, and vice president and general manager, Tim Matthews. Bill, Tim, thank you so much for both joining us this evening.
Good to be here.
Thanks for having us. Great to be here.
Okay, now, Bill, we've interviewed you previously. I believe it was episode 50. And, we asked the previous questions of what got you started in rugby and all that stuff. So, Tim, this is firmly directed at you. These are the questions we ask everyone when they come on the podcast. We'll start off. What got you started in rugby to begin with?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think similar to many of my generation, it was a high school teacher. So I transferred for my grade 12 year. So I was 18 years old. I came to a new school. I figured I was going to play football. That's what you do when you go to high school here. And I went to, I think, 2 practices. When I heard a voice sitting on the stairs of a portable, I walked past and it was my history teacher. And he said, you're in my history class. I said, yep. I said, it looks like you like to hit guys. I said, yeah. He goes, do you like to run with the ball? I said, well, I'm on defense. They don't let me. And then he just, would you like to? And that was it. So he got a rugby ball in my hands the next day, and I was a rugby player. As easy as that.
Always amazes me how many times we ask this question, and like the number one response seems to be something along the lines of, I get to hit people, sign me up for this. And so you mentioned your history teacher for that as well. So like, is there anybody else that kind of had a big influence on you as you were kind of getting started into rugby, or, even following the passion to eventually, get in the role that you have with a professional team in Toronto?
For sure. And to be fair, I should offer a little bit more detail there around that history teacher, because him and his family would not like it if I left it that it was just hitting guys. So it was Cecil Moody. He ran the program out of Lawrence Park for decades. And he was the reason that I started and kept playing the game, and truthfully understood sort of the passions and the inner workings of the game and why it's so special. So Cecil Moody is the reason that I started playing and pursued it. The other person that really sort of helped me harness my ambitions as a player, but then as a coach and then now as an executive, would be John McMillan. He was my coach at a couple of 8th grade teams and then at the Pacific Pride. And he's someone that I'm still in touch with to this day as a mentor, and somebody that I wouldn't be where I am if it weren't for him. So Cecil Moody and John McMillan are the 2 names that certainly come to front of mind.
So that's someone who obviously influenced you when you were getting started with rugby, but there's always the on-field inspiration. Who is someone that every time they step or have stepped onto the pitch that you just loved watching them play?
Yeah, it's I'd have to go back to when I was coming up. I was an open side flanker, so it was the heyday of George Smith and Richie McCaw. Mm-hmm. Those 2 guys just played the position the right way, and obviously were great leaders for their sides as well. So for those reasons, it'd be those 2 guys. You can make a case for many others, but those are the first 2 minds that come to mind.
All right, good to hear. So Tim, you were appointed as the vice president and general manager of the Toronto Arrows. For our listeners, can you give a layman's term explanation of what your day-to-day involves?
Sure. I mean, the easy answer is that every day is different, and different points of the season, as I've experienced up to this point, having just taken on the role late at the end of 2022. But first and foremost, everything we work backwards from player performance on the field. So everything that goes into making sure that the squad is prepared, the support staff around them, working backward. We have regular touch points to make sure that we're maintaining an environment that sets them up for success. The other piece I would say is also sort of keeping an eye on the horizon. So whether that's with our academy, relationships with other programs, making sure that we're in touch with stakeholders in the community across the country. We can't. I've got to make sure that I keep my eye on for 2024 and seasons beyond. And then the other significant aspect to the role is working with Bill and our commercial team around the game day experience and building up to our home opener on April the 8th. As you guys are well aware, we start the season on the road, so we get a little bit more time to get some momentum and plan toward our home opener, but really put some exciting plans in place to make sure the game day experience, fan experience matches what we'd like it to.
And that is great to hear. So we'll speak to the Arrows and the off season. So Bill or Tim, come in with anything you'd like to talk about, but let's begin with, so the Arrows were unfortunately unable to make the playoffs in 2022. So how early did the process begin to prepare for the 2023 season?
So I think the best place to start is, as with any team, and certainly at the professional level, upon the end of the last season, there's exit interviews, there's reviews on the roster, there's discussions that are had about areas for improvement, and those discussions start nearly right on the back of the end of the season, and start thinking about who's available, who's ready to step up, who's ready to move on, and start to form out a roster that we believe would set the team up for success, both in year, based on the needs and the requirements of the MLR season and the style of play, but also with an idea or a lens toward developing players. So there's depth in year, but also player progression for year-on-year sustained success. That doesn't come easily, as you both are aware, across the international slots that each franchise has, as well as the balance with domestic players. There's always a little bit of back and forth, identifying how to strategically use those international slots with players who will fit into the environment. There's a lot of options, but getting the fit right is of the highest importance to make sure that those players can integrate with what we're trying to build as an ecosystem for a successful, sustained program year on year. There is an identity and a culture to the Arrows that Bill and the team and the rosters before me have built. It's something that we don't take lightly and want to make sure that we get that right. So it's a nuanced approach that I would say starts right away and even starts as we're in season, thinking about how we'll plan and shape things for the year to come, and then building up right until we get the guys in the environment here, Jan 1, Jan 2, and kick off the next season. Everything builds toward that.
And I just add that, you notice if you look at our roster this year, that there's a few more experienced players. Some of our overseas players with a bit more experience, and we have more size. We've historically been one of the smallest sides in the MLR, and this year we've changed that up a fair bit. So those are some of the thematic changes. And in terms of other preparations we made, last year was a really strange year because we were still in, if you remember, during our training camp from January and February, we were still under lockdowns here in Ontario.
Yeah.
After going through that traumatizing year of being down in Atlanta, we were still in lockdowns. We didn't know whether we were going to come out of lockdown, until partway through the preseason in time to be able to play home games. It was very unnerving. And we did have to shift locations a couple of times during our preseason, which was not exactly conducive. And also one of the changes we had to make this year was where we located our daily training environment. And with a lot of hard work and the help of people like Neil McDougall and others, we located, we're now training indoors at Lamport under the dome. We have a gym very close by within about 100 meters that the boys do their S&C strength and conditioning at. And we found a great office space that we refer to as the Hangar, as in an aircraft aviation hangar. And that's where we have our daily training. That's where we have our meetings, medical, and meals, the 3Ms. And it's a really great space. And it's also within about 50 meters of Lamport. So we have a little campus. Everything's within very close walking distance. The players have really taken to it. It's been a great place for them to be able to study film, to be able to meet as a group, to be able to go into breakout meetings. Our medical and therapy is there. We have meals brought in there for them. And it's probably, well, without a doubt, it's the best environment that we've had in any of our, lively 5 seasons to date. So we're very fortunate to have that. The players are appreciative, and it's a great place to prepare to perform. And, while we're off to a little bit of a rocky start here, we're looking forward to our game on Saturday against Chicago. I think the guys are starting to settle into a bit of a groove. We've got some guys coming back from injury, fortunately, and we should have a good performance on Saturday.
Yeah, so I want to kind of circle back to Tim. You brought up the foreign player slots and how important that is, and like how when you're thinking about like constructing the roster, but I'm sure also yourself and Peter Smith have to be very thoughtful of how that goes into just the match day 23 as well, with only having 8 slots. How important is it to also be able to find those guys? Say like a player like Nick Benn that is, has that overseas experience, but can also be Canadian qualified. So how important is it to find those guys, and how do you actually go about locating and identifying Canadian eligible players from, around the world, and not just the guys that are, maybe born and raised and grew up in Canada and played through the Canadian rugby system?
Yeah, it's a great question. Truthfully, it's something that, we always look to improve upon and get better at. And I think the honest answer is it's a little bit of inbound and outbound work, right? As we go on as an entity within MLR, we've become known as a bit of a known commodity and a pathway for players who have domestic eligibility to pursue playing for Canada one day. And I think that would be the inbound. The outbound piece is just making sure that we maintain relationships with international programs and work to identify players. Because, the opportunity to bring in a player who will help add depth and competition at the national team level while bolstering our roster, it's a win-win for everybody. Our mandate is an ambitious one. It's to help raise, the level of play across the board in Canada. So us being a positive contribution to that ecosystem is a big part of that. And finding guys like Nick Benn, Will Grant, Connor Grindle, who are domestic eligible for Canada, who can help us along, we can develop them, is something that we will look to continue to do, as you say, to benefit from their experience having played in international leagues. But ultimately, they're guys who qualify for Canada and do aim or strive to play for wear the Maple Leaf one day. And if we can be a part of that, fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess my other question is just as far as like, obviously, through the first few years of the Toronto Arrows and the MLR, the roster has, there hasn't necessarily been like a whole lot of turnover. The Arrows have been a very like consistent team, lots of players sticking around for 2, 3, 4 years, which speaks to like the culture of the team that you've been able to create. But this offseason, it seemed like there was a lot more player movement, both guys on their way out and coming back in. Bill, I know you mentioned that the team's a lot bigger now as well. Was there any like philosophical change to the way you guys constructed the roster during the off season, or is just some of the player transactions just life happens and people sometimes move on?
I don't think there's one answer that would cover sort of all of the circumstances for sure. I think a big part of it though would be sort of, as you alluded to, just the Ontario Blues program moving across into what is now sort of the Arrows over time. Players eventually move on. That was a cohesive unit that had been together, and life circumstances change. People make their own decisions. So I don't think there's a simple answer for sort of that would cover all, but I do think that it was done sort of within the balance of still maintaining the integrity and the core culture of the team, and certainly wish those players well that moved on. We're still a Canadian franchise. We're Canadian rugby supporters. They're Canadian players who have found professional rugby in North America, and that's ultimately a good thing as well in terms of the bigger picture. There's more Canadians playing in the MLR than ever before, and our roster is only so big. There's only so many that we can carry, so we maintain our position to help drive things forward. And there will be turnover on the roster from year to year, but we do aim, as I say, to maintain the integrity, the core of the team, with an eye for year-on-year growth and development.
And our roster is still north of 70% Canadian. And if you start adding in the athletes that we've brought in to what we call the High Performance Academy, some of our academy players who are actually training inside our daily training environment, it's well north of that. And on top of that, we're doing all this work developing Canadian players in our 3 academy locations, as well as the junior academy. That's something we're really excited about, and I think demonstrates our commitment to developing Canadian talent. We're getting increasing demands to grow those programs in new locations and where they are. And what that's doing is building the base of Canadian players that are within our system, and that you'll see hopefully wearing Arrows jerseys and Canadian jerseys in the years to come. It's one of the most exciting things about what we're doing that people don't see a lot of, but they will see these athletes competing either, on the Canadian age grade teams or in academy competitions games we'll be announcing as we get into our season. It's a pretty exciting piece of the whole puzzle.
Yeah. And I know Stu wants to kind of jump in here, but I just because you did mention the academy, I was just wondering, like, is there any, like, what is kind of, I guess, maybe league wide, like the plans for like the academy? Like, is there like an opportunity to set up, I don't know, for a lack of better term, like minor league rugby in a way of like, all the academy teams like playing against each other and stuff, or like what's kind of like the plan for that from like maybe like a league wide point of view?
Yeah, so it's another great question that you asked, Derek. And the interesting piece for me having come into this, when you talk about a minor league, just look at the geographies across the cities in the MLR. Right now, I look outside, there's a foot of snow, right? So for us to have an active academy, for our in-season, it really can't be playing outdoor in Ontario. That's very different than some of the franchises in the southern US. So everyone is going about it, I would say, with the same end goal in mind, but having to be mindful of their local circumstances. So some of the things that I'm excited about is us working with other programs that are currently in season within Canada, be it those on the West Coast. So making sure that we're in touch with those programs, watching film and constant communication with coaches in those programs for player development. And then, as Bill mentioned, with an eye toward our academy season, which will kick off somewhat in line with the club season here when snow melts, fields thaw, and we can have some local talent that's playing rugby. So everybody, I would say, across the MLR is trying to find ways to do that, whether it be with the schools or with club locally, to continue to develop talent. But as is often the case when we start talking about rugby in Canada and North America, geography will factor in and seasons will factor in. So there's no one cookie cutter answer to that, but I can say that everybody's working on it to make sure that there's pathways, there's development opportunities, and ultimately positive experiences for players and programs.
I think it'll take a few years for there to be, every academy team in the MLR playing one another. That's an expensive thing.
Yeah.
Everyone's also you have geographic challenges. However, you will see these one-off games against other academy. You might also see the formation of some regional academies for different purposes, or regional teams made up of players from different academies. Potentially, it's something that's evolving. That said, the Arrows Academy will be playing a number of very meaningful games within Canada this year. And as you saw last year, we had overseas teams come to visit. There's a wide variety of options. And really what it comes down to is, scheduling, availability. But the players are certainly keen to do this. And the competition, what's really heartwarming is that the competition to get into these academies, both the junior academy and the senior academy, is intense. The word about these academies is spreading. We get this is what's really interesting this fall, which was really heartwarming for me, was as we came towards the end of the rugby season and sevens was starting, I was around the pitches a lot, and then players and parents were coming up to me, whether they were university, students or high school students, and their parents saying, I want to be a professional rugby player. I want to play for the Arrows and I want to play for Canada. What are the different pathways available? And it's not, for some, it's going out to the Pacific Pride, and that's great. But for others, if you want to do studies, systems design engineering at the University of Waterloo, and you're a good rugby player and you need to stay in Ontario, but you don't want to get off the pathway, being in the Arrows Academy is a great option. And we're seeing those sorts of things happening for university and college students, and those students in the Ontario Blues Junior Arrows Academy. Like, you're seeing a significant number of those players being represented, in the U18 age grade program for Canada and in the U20 age grade program for Canada as they move up. So these programs are having a real impact, not just on the Arrows and our future, but also on the Canadian rugby scene. So we're really proud of that. And it's, like I say, we're getting demand for increased geographic presence. I hope there's a day where we actually have Arrows Academies coast to coast, and it won't surprise me if that actually is happening within the not too distant future.
Interesting. Speaking of the city of Toronto, exactly. Toronto is a big city. It has 3 of the big 4 sports teams. It also has an MLS team and a CFL team as well. And by that extension, there's a very saturated market. So how do you go about marketing a new professional team? For a lot of people, it will be a minor sport that they're not too familiar with in a city where the Maple Leafs are practically a religion.
I'll take a crack at it first, and I'm sure Tim will have his perspectives. We both have kids, and so we have the perspective of kids as well as adults. I mean, I think the way the Arrows, first of all, you start with your passionate rugby community. Those are table stakes that those people come to the games. They're going to be there. Kids are going to be there who play because they know the game. Second, it's about getting the non-rugby fan to come. And there are a couple elements to that. One is, it's a very, compared to going to a Leafs game or a Raptors game where you almost have to take out a second mortgage, coming to an Arrows game is a very affordable thing, both through ticket, great game day experience. And you've seen how active we are. We have one of the most active social media and effective social media presence in the MLR. And I think we swing above our weight here in Toronto. We don't pretend that we're competing with the Leafs or the Raptors or the Jays. However, we do have a presence out there, and we are seeing, what we ask too is that people who are fans and season ticket holders bring a friend. The best thing we can do is get somebody to come to a game once, and if they have a great time, they'll generally come again. For people who haven't been to York Lions Stadium, it's a terrific stadium for watching sports. You have a seat, it's modern, it's clean. You have good seats, you have good sight lines of the field. There's a VIP section, but one of the coolest things I think is, and especially for a very passionate community like rugby, where people like to mix and mingle and talk and have a beer, is that there's that large concourse. So you can have one of the cheaper seats in the stadium, but you can walk to the halfway line or wherever you want to be, meet with your friends, have a beer, have a chat, and see the game. Or you can walk down to that area we call the Garden, where we have craft beer, craft food, watch the game end on, as many people like to do. So it's a great place to watch a game. It's easy to get to with a subway stop just 30 meters away at Pioneer Village. So these are some of the elements that we're playing up, and we call it rugbytainment last year, and you're going to see big improvement this year because we've had more time to plan, where there'll be in addition to the game, there'll be more music, more entertainment on the field, more noise in the stands through various ways that people will find out about, entertainment of various kinds in the beer garden, as well as really top class rugby. So, we think it's a great value for a family or an individual to come. That we're also doing extensive marketing to the universities and colleges all around Ontario, They all have massive databases of alumni, and we've been reaching out through to them. And when we talk about TIRF later in the interview, I'm sure I'll talk about some other mechanisms we're using to get people out to the games.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we can maybe we can stay on the match day experience. So obviously, we already alluded to it. April 8th is the home opener, so that's, I guess, less than a month away now. It's quickly creeping up here. But so you kind of so look at, I guess we'll go kind of with the first question. You guys, the Arrows' first years in the league, you kind of split time between York University and Lamport Stadium. What were like some of the driving factors behind permanently moving to York Lions Stadium for last season and then going forward into this year as well?
Yeah, I'll take that one. Plain and simple, it's just the quality of the facility. While Lamport has a great location, the change rooms are in really bad condition. They're very small. There's not a lot of hot water. There's not sufficient power. It's very difficult to put on a modern high-end TV broadcast there because of the lack of power, and the place needs a lot of work. And the city recognizes that, ourselves recognize that, and other partners. And there are some, quiet conversations going on as people look to the decade, ahead as to what might be done with Lamport. But it certainly needs, in order to be a venue for a professional rugby, the facility does need some real work. And, York Lions Stadium is a legacy asset of the York Lions, on the other hand, is a legacy asset of the Pan Am Games. It's in wonderful shape. They put down a brand new pitch. So from a player's point of view, there's a brand new pitch there. There's a video board. There's a great sound system. There's lots of power. There's places to move around. And as well, York University have been outstanding partners for us. Absolutely outstanding. They're getting more used to running and working with us. We run and operate the events, but they've been great partners in terms of setup, accessibility, and it's becoming a destination. The TFC2 Academy are playing games there. York United is playing CPL soccer there. So I think this stadium is going to become a bit of a destination. And some people say, well, the location's not as easy as Lamport, but actually when you get on that subway, it's pretty accessible. And for all those people in the 905 in the greater Toronto area, and there's a lot of them, it's easy to get to, plus you have go buses, etc. So, as once people get there, they love the location, and we're going to continue building on that.
Yeah, I live 10 minutes away from it. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the location myself. So that for me, the convenience is right there for me. So.
Yeah, I made the mistake, unfortunately, in the off season of moving further away from Lamport Stadium. But
that's your own fault, Stu.
From all the same, from Lamport Stadium, from York Lions Stadium, it's just foolish decision when house hunting is. How close is this to the rugby? I should have included that. Oh well. So the Arrows are also in the position of I believe they're the last team to have a home game in MLR. And Bill, I know you went to the home opener for the game against Rugby New York. So when you see these games, when you see these new locations, for example, Chicago at SeatGeek Stadium, are you like picking up things that they're doing for their home openers and thinking like, oh, that works really well. Maybe we should do something like that. Or I wouldn't have done that, but we could take elements and use that when it comes to the Arrows home opener on April 8th.
Yeah, good question. I'd say we've been planning far ahead. We knew where we were going to be playing this season. So we've got lots of ideas about what we're going to do, not just for game one, but throughout all our games. Keep those a bit of a secret. As I said, there'll be a lot of entertainment. There'll be a lot more noise. New York had a great setup, but it was brand new. They had to scramble to get ready to be in that, but it was an improved stadium. In many ways, it reminds me of York Lions Stadium, except without a subway. People had to drive. It was a harder to get to for people in New York, but a very nice stadium, good pitch. Atlanta was in the same stadium as last year. It turned out to be a very, very cold evening. So I think all I could recommend is, it felt almost like Canada. It was just above freezing, which is unusual. So I wouldn't take it as a representative, season opener for Atlanta. Hopefully we'll have good weather come April 8th, but we've got lots of plans and we know the location really well. The team's well on top of it, and it'll be a great experience for our fans.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess the history of Arrow's home games is a little bizarre given the pandemic kind of throwing it off a little bit, and then no home games in 2020 and 2021. But what are, like, I guess as far as like putting on the game day experience, like what do you feel is like the biggest things that you've kind of learned, whether it's just about like what works, what doesn't work, or even just like what you've realized, like what Arrows fans have been enjoying, or and how you've kind of evolved that? Because I mean, you're hinting at a lot of what fun things for the upcoming season. I'm just kind of wondering like how, like, even though maybe you don't necessarily have to reveal anything if you're not ready for that yet, but like what's kind of like the thought process and like how how developing that game day experience kind of evolves over time the more home games you guys have.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, I think last season we really raised our game a lot at York, given what we could do there. So I think people take for granted that there'll be great craft beers and great food. We have a food provider, a very unique food provider called Trey Dish, which served up some really differentiated and interesting sorts of food that we got a lot of good feedback on, and they'll be back with us again this year. I think that's something. I think having a really good video scoreboard. Not every team has one in the MLR. We're very fortunate to have one. So for showing replays, having it, we're going to take the music experience up to a different level this year for a bit of a hint. And I think having good music, good DJ, I think giving the crowd some additional devices with which they can make some noise to cheer on the team is always a great thing. And I think there'll be themes this year that we'll announce as we get closer to those games, themes for each game, as well as, in some cases there'll be we'll use Alumni Stadium for some other matches for whether it's for a women's match or junior matches over there. So people might come early for community events. We really want to, as well as doing interesting things at halftime on the field. So we want to be, we say Canada's most accessible, or really Canada, not just Toronto, but Canada's most accessible professional sports team. And I think, again, one of the other things you asked about that we've done right is that after the game, that fans are able to come onto the field, the players are able to go and meet with, the fans in the garden. And that sort of interaction, the ability to take photographs, get autographs, mix and mingle with the players, is something that we're going to do, even more of this year, and make sure that our non-dressing players on the day are circulating in the crowd, getting to know our fans, educating them, and especially meeting with the youth, because these are the players that become really heroes and inspirations for the up and coming players.
Excellent. Well, one of the big stories that came out during the off season is that while other MLR teams have a big sponsor, or, in the case of New York, their nickname across the front of their jerseys, Toronto have gone in a different direction and had the Toronto Inner City Rugby Foundation plastered front and center on both their home and away kits. So this is a partnership that has already existed in some form, but now is literally coming to the forefront. So how long has the Arrows been involved with TIRF, and what has that relationship involved up until this point?
Well, the Arrows have been involved with TIRF right since the beginning of the Arrows, but predating that, I've known about TIRF since the beginning, and I've been on their advisory board, or their captain's council, as they call it, for 11 out of the 12 years of their existence. For those who don't know what TIRF is, it's the Toronto Inner City Rugby Foundation. It's a not-for-profit community impact organization that works in the priority neighborhoods of Toronto. And really, it's about personal and community development for young people, primarily teenagers, through the sport of rugby for both boys and girls. And it is an incredible organization. It has gone from strength to strength. It's come through COVID. It's been the biggest source of adding registered and rugby participants in this province and probably in the country. A effective way of introducing young people to rugby, but more importantly, it's had a really impactful an impact on young people's lives, giving them, introduction to sport in an inexpensive way, giving them a place to go after school. TIRF works through the school boards. It also works through community centers, any organization that wants to participate with them. And it shares the values of rugby. It creates a community for kids to be a part of, a rugby community. And we all know how passionate and healthy that community is for the most part. And it gives them an outlet. If they come from a single parent family, it gives them a place to be after school and get involved. And it provides a pathway as well. I mean, we've had many TIRF athletes continue to play rugby, boys and girls, up into college and university. And in fact, we've had a couple of, by my count, 3 players who've come up through TIRF who've actually gone to university or college and ended up playing for the Arrows. And there's one young lady who's come up through TIRF who's actually played for the Canada Sevens, women's sevens team. So this is now the elite rugby part is that's a byproduct, and that's great, but it's really about that community development. And to just give you a sense of the magnitude, this year TIRF expects to affect about 25,000 young people in the city of Toronto. That's enormous. It's absolutely, and some of that's, one day. It can be anything from a one-day introduction to rugby, to participating in house leagues that TIRF sets up, to participating in their Rising Star program, to joining a club and playing for their school. So it's a wonderful organization. And to our knowledge, we've searched around a lot, we are the first professional rugby team on the planet to ever have a not-for-profit community impact organization on the front of our jersey for an entire season. Barcelona has done it with UNICEF in soccer. Nottingham Forest did it with another UN organization on the front of their jersey. But to the best of our knowledge, we're the first professional rugby team to do it. And it's a bit of a no-brainer, especially coming out of COVID. I saw how impactful TIRF was, and just because of what it does for people and what it does for our game, they're a natural partner. And one of the programs that we're now talking about more openly that's existed in the past is for anybody who comes, if somebody has Arrow season tickets or a flex pack or buys a bunch of individual tickets, if you can't use them, these tickets will never go to waste because you can easily turn them back to the Arrows electronically. And what we do is we have a bank of these tickets, which we then forward on to TIRF players and their families who express an interest in wanting those tickets. And so a ticket never gets wasted. It's paid for, which benefits the Arrows, but we want bums in seats, and we want accessibility. We want every young person in their family who wants to go to a professional rugby game, especially an Arrows game, to be able to go. And so this makes that possible. We've done it in the past with a very high success rate, and this year we want to promote it even more. It gets young people into the stands, and it's a win-win-win all around. So that's the story of TIRF. It's for anybody who wants to know more about it, I strongly suggest you just go to TIRFrugby.ca and check it out. They have scholarship programs. For anybody who may want to donate directly to TIRF, there's a way to do that. But I've been involved in a lot of community impact organizations over time, and this is really one of the best. We're very, very fortunate that it happens to have, and not surprisingly, have rugby at the core of it. So we should all be proud as rugby people. And the program's well known by rugby folks I think in the GTA. What's great now is that we can promote it, and part of the reason we want to have it on the jersey is to promote the program more broadly to the rest of the greater Toronto area.
One piece I would add to that is that part of being in professional sports is community outreach and working with community organizations. For our guys to be able to do this through rugby, with rugby as the vehicle for outreach, it just really energizes the team. We're thankful for all of our sponsors and all of our relationships with partners. But the guys' eyes light up when it's a turf event or the opportunity to work with kids, introduce the game. They can see themselves. A lot of them can see themselves in these kids and the opportunity, and it really is just a tremendously positive experience. So, and something that we're very excited about end to end as an organization.
And the response of our commercial partners, who are paying, love it. They think they feel great to be associated with TIRF and with a professional team that has a community impact organization front and center on their jersey. They think it's great. So we weren't worried about it, but we were very pleasantly surprised by how positive that response has been.
Yeah, I was going to ask what has been the reaction from partners, from players, and it seems like you've already answered the question. There's been articles posted about the Arrows being the first rugby team to have a non-profit on the front of their jersey for the entire season. Has there been any other reactions from just the city in general, or alumni and former players, anything along those lines?
Just it's all been positive. Like just from York University. I'll give you one example of the city loves it. I've heard that the mayor's aware of it, city councilors are aware of it. Obviously everybody who's involved in a rugby club knows what TIRF is in Toronto. But here's a good example. York University, who we partner with, obviously, and where we play our games, and where that you're going to hear things over time about how that partnership continues to evolve in some broader ways. I think it's 85% of students who go to York are from the Greater Toronto area. Many of those students who go to York come from priority neighborhoods. York, up until recently, wasn't really aware of TIRF, and TIRF, they didn't have a really strong relationship, even though they were sharing some of the same neighborhoods. And we facilitated a formal introduction between York and TIRF, and it's really taken off, both organizations. And you're starting to see tours by TIRF students. A big part of TIRF is creating that aspiration for these young people to want to go to get a post-secondary education at college or university. York would love to be that destination, especially as these are Toronto citizens. And so you're going to see a much deeper relationship between York and TIRF at a time when York is working with a little bit of advice from us and some assistance to redevelop their men's and their women's rugby programs. So again, it's a win-win-win. We call it's about creating on-ramps for people to get involved in the sport. The Arrows touch a lot of different parts of our community, and we want to try to make connections wherever we can to help them. And there are just so many great facets to TIRF. We have sponsors who are now saying, hey, could we hire some of these young people to help us, with labor? In certain industries, they're having trouble finding labor right now. And so then now you've got opportunities for summer jobs for some of these young folks, with folks who are rugby supporters, by sponsoring the Arrows. So I think this relationship, this ecosystem, as it grows in the Greater Toronto area, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg right now. Who knows where it'll go? But people are starting to make connections. There's a major Canadian bank, I won't sort of say who it is, that is very active in the Jane Finch area and we've made some introductions there between TIRF and York, and there we'll see what they start to do with it. It's exciting times.
Yeah, I mean, this all sounds awesome. The Arrows did a press release today, so maybe a couple days ago by the time anybody's listening to this, but that I guess launched the 2023 ticket donation portal for TIRF as well. So if you want to know how to actually donate your tickets to TIRF, just head to torontoarrows.com. It's one of the top news stories on the website right now. But just for a little bit of clarification, just because I believe you mentioned for season ticket holders to donate, if someone just has say a pair of tickets to any of the 8 games, can they also donate that? Like, can single game ticket holders also, they can also donate that as well? Perfect. Okay. So I'm assuming the same process that's outlined on TorontoArrows.com right now.
Correct. It's really easy and painless. It's there. And if anyone ever needs help, there's people you can contact, but it's just an electronic transfer back to us, and we will see that they get into the hands of deserving young people.
Absolutely awesome to hear. Well, seeing as you guys are the top dogs within the Toronto Arrows, you obviously have a bit of an insider view into what's going on in MLR, and especially over the past few months, we've seen the expansion into the American Midwest with the Chicago Hounds. And for 2024, we will be expanding into Florida with the Miami Sharks. So from what you've been told, what can we expect to see from these new teams? Or should I say, from what you've been told that you can tell us?
So I think, just any expansion is exciting. I think as it relates to the Miami group, certainly a highly professional outfit that came to the table with an impressive bid, foresight and planning in terms of how they could stand up a professional rugby team in the Miami market. I think, which would be criteria that the league will look at for any potential expansion moving forward. It is sort of the credibility, the professionalism, the expertise, and the vision to how to stand up rugby and how to get it started. I think we've learned it doesn't necessarily have to hit the largest markets in North America, but the right markets, the right balance of opportunity, available facilities that can house MLR crowds, not necessarily come up against the big 4 sports. They can in some markets. We've seen it be successful depending on the approach. And then working with the local community. The rugby community is a good accent, but it can't be the sole base for a successful franchise moving forward. So you have to be able to tap into a market. As Bill mentioned, we position the Arrows as an entertaining but affordable family outing for an Arrows game. So finding the right entry points in any new market is important. And that's what the Miami group brought to the table, was a vision and a plan to execute against that, which is very exciting. I mean, not just because it's another warm climate for us for games to play in. Do you get out of the snow here in March? But the other side, ultimately, with the roster rules in the MLR, it's 25 to 30 rugby jobs in North America for domestic eligible players, and that's ultimately a good thing. More players playing professional rugby in North America.
How has I guess maybe Bill, this might be more of a question for you, but like as an owner in this league, how has the expansion process changed since the Toronto Arrows entered the league in 2019 to now, and what's expected of say teams like Chicago, Miami, or whoever might that 14th plus team might end up being?
Yeah, I think the standards just keep rising. I mean, the expansion fees have risen significantly. They were de minimis when we came in, which is nice. Now the expansion fees are quite significant. So we're screening for partners who have the financial wherewithal to pay that fee and to make the investment over a number of years to grow a team. Expectations around the quality of the stadium that people are in have changed. The table stakes around all the basics of a daily training environment, the coaching, the training facility, the S&C, the analytics, the nutrition, the psychologists, like the staffing of the teams these days, and the quality of the coaching is significantly higher than it was in the early days. The league's really gone. I mean, we feel it's become more competitive. You see, what's great is that there's a fair bit of parity within the league, but the teams that who's making the playoffs each year changes a fair bit, which is great. And the quality of the players is changing. So, and the other big element is the ability to put on a great game day experience. The rugby will not sell itself. You have to provide rugby-tainment, which means there has to be a significant entertainment component in addition to the rugby itself. And you also have to be prepared to make significant investments in your academy system. And there are rewards for that. We like to joke, the more you spend on your academies, the more you get to spend on your salary cap. You have the right to spend more money. But this is why the MLR is the single biggest source of growth of this sport in North America. It's the reason why World Rugby has awarded a World Cup for 2031 and 2033 for the women to North America. So the table stakes are higher, the background checks, all of that, it's just at a higher level. And we had a board meeting today, and we're talking, this is a topic every year. Can you, willingness to be able to host and preparedness to be able to host a final potentially? Does your city have what it takes, and your facility have what it takes to be able to host a semifinal or a final? So these are all high-class problems or high-class challenges, I would say, that make the league significantly better. We're really trying to learn lessons at a very rapid rate. MLS took a long time to develop, and I think as a league, we've stumbled in a couple of places, but we've made up for it in others. And I think that the future is bright.
With that being said, like, what do you think is, I guess, as an MLR owner, what do you think the biggest thing that you have learned over the last 5 years about operating a professional rugby team has been? Maybe something that you didn't quite expect when you began this journey so many years ago.
No, great question. At the team level, so let's start at the team level. At the team level, there are a lot of moving parts. And even if you X out having a pandemic and having to move a team to another country or going 1,000 days, I mean, yeah, it's like we've been through in Toronto. We've seen just about all of it, because we went 1,000 days without a home game. I think the resilience, but it's a very complex puzzle to put together. Tim and I like to talk about this, and it's part of why we find it fun and challenging, is that it's all about people, it's about facilities, it's about sports science, it's about culture, it's how you deal with things you can't control, to some extent, like injuries and weather, and and how do you grow a sport that's a secondary sport in a very competitive sports market. It's a great challenge, but we love the game. Like, we're all addicted to rugby, so we are trying to do it, and we know the good things that this sport does, both for the players and for the community. The second at a second layer, at a league level, I had some very good advice from a very famous sports owner before I got into this, who said, "Hey, the structure of this league is a single entity. You're not only are you going to operate a team, you're going to be business partners owning an equal slice of this league. And you'll never know exactly, no matter how much due diligence you do, you'll never really know what your fellow partners are like until you get into the room and start having disagreements and agreements and having to deal with adversity." And I'm so glad he said that. He wasn't trying to turn me off. He was just trying to say that's going to be your single biggest challenge at the league level. And it has, but I would say, fortunately, we've got some really great partners in this league. And over time, we've got to know one another better. We've learned how to cooperate. We've learned how to collaborate in the best interests of the league. We've realized that we are a partner, although we compete very, very intensely on the field. We are business partners in growing this enterprise, and everyone's heart's in the right spot. Everyone wants to grow the sport. We're delighted that we've got that. It sounds like it's a long way away for that 2031 World Cup. And we got a lot of work to do. Canada and the US both did not qualify for this World Cup, but I think we're up for the challenge. And, there's never, ever, you cannot get bored. There's never a dull moment in this business. So as challenging it is, few people get to do work that they really, really love and try to attack really complex puzzles that, even if you get part of it right, you feel great. And I always think to myself, one of the best things that could happen for Canadian rugby, which has had some pretty tough goes, would be for the Arrows to win an MLR Shield. And we can't promise when that's going to happen, but we're working our butts off, all of us, the players, the staff, our sponsors, our fans, to do that. And that is our goal, not just to win one, but to win a couple, and to grow this sport and to help do our piece to restore Canadian men's rugby, at least, but to grow the game broadly as best we can. So
just to let you know, Mike Shepard did say 5 in a row a couple episodes ago. So if that's I hope everybody in the organization's aligned on the 5 in a row idea.
That's why he's one of our captains.
Fair enough.
Did Shep commit to playing another 5 seasons? Is that what that means?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess maybe it might depend on the contract. Maybe the contract.
Never count Shep out, man. He'll be the Gordie Howe of MLR.
I would love to see it personally. I would think he can get a statue built after in front of York Lions Stadium.
I'll go for that.
All right. As we start to wrap up this interview, I've got one question. It's going to be a bit of a fun exercise. So let's say a consortium of billionaires come to MLR and say that we want to invest in a new franchise with a new academy. We fulfill all the criteria. Money's not an object, but we can't decide on a city or a location of where we want to base our new franchise. Now you could answer this in like, oh, this area had like a great rugby community that's up and coming. It could be, I'd really like a weekend to visit this city, so you can choose that. But I'll put this to all of us. But I'll start with Tim. Tim, if you could pick any city in North America to have another MLR franchise, where would you recommend?
You're really putting me on the spot. I appreciate the chance to go first on this one. So nobody will take my answer. But no, truthfully, and I hope you don't see this as me dodging the question. I don't think you can go wrong with another city in North America. I do believe that there is a place for professional rugby in the North American markets. There's an opportunity within the sports landscape for this to hit. So I don't think you could go wrong. But I would say that if anyone were to go somewhere, unless with their endless amounts of cash, they could solve for a thawed field in January, February, it would have to be a warm climate. I still maintain there are more challenges for the northern teams due to geography and weather. So I'd be inclined to pick somewhere warm.
All right. Okay. A warm city. I'm sure we'll be able to find them. Bill, any other city in North America?
Yeah, no.
Also, you can't be mean and just say, I'll put another team in New York just to mess with them.
Oh, like the Mets and the Giants.
Yeah.
The Mets and the Yankees, sort of thing, the old Giants. A no-brainer for me is LA. Warm climate. We had a team there. Somebody's got to step up, especially if they're a gazillionaire, put a team in LA. I wouldn't put it in the LA Coliseum again. I'd put it in somewhere a little more medium size, but I think LA would be great. I think Austin proved that they had a good, so getting somebody back in Austin. And, if you're thinking East Coast, I'll say 3 here. Miami, I think there's potential for something in, maybe in Orlando or North Carolina or one of the Carolinas, opportunity for an east to keep that balance, to have an eastern yet southern warm climate team would be very helpful for the league expansion. We're trying to grow in a really controlled and sensible way, and it actually does matter. That climate issue is a big one. So,
Derek, if you could have a team in anywhere in North America, where would you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's value in going to the biggest markets, and right now the biggest market that doesn't have a team is LA. So I would probably try to go back to that.
For my choice, I'm going to throw an absolute spanner into the works. I'm going to take your suggestion of obviously having a warmer climate, and going for a big market as well. But I also know that this city is a young city. It's a growing city. admittedly, the rugby isn't as strong there as other places in North America, but I'm sure there'd be a niche that can be carved out, and it is Major League Rugby. I am talking about the biggest city in all of North America. I'm talking about Mexico City. And obviously, these bazillionaires would have their lawyers and they'd be able to sort out the contracts of a Mexican team playing in MLR. So, again, this is the money is no object thing. But really appreciate your answers and your choices. They make a lot of sense. And yeah, we really appreciate you both being on the podcast tonight, Bill and Tim.
Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks for having us, guys. Just if I could quickly, Derek and Stu, I do want to thank you both for the podcast and the content that you put out. The rugby community needs more of it. You have faithful listeners and readers for a reason. So yeah, on behalf of those who tune in and who read, thanks for putting out the content that you do. I wish more people would step up and put more out there, but for those that do, thank you.
Thank you. Definitely much appreciated, Tim. And if you would like to listen to any of the episodes we have previously done, you can check out those as well as our written pieces on our new website, therougerugby.ca. You can also find our podcasts available on Spotify, Anchor FM, and Apple Podcasts. We have a YouTube channel at Rouge Rugby with episodes of the podcast as well as extra interviews with players and coaches. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell notification to stay up to date with all our videos. We are also available across social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, all at Rouge Rugby. Well, guys, if anyone's listening and they're like, I need to get my Arrows tickets as soon as possible, especially for that home opener on April 8th, where can they buy their tickets from?
TorontoArrows.com. And your merch, too. Get your swag. Replica jerseys are on sale.
Fantastic. Yeah, that was just announced. You have the match fit and the relax fit. And I'm sure all us front row players will be very grateful for the relax fit. Derek, where can the fine people find you on social media?
At Brissette the Jet across basically every social media platform that you can think of.
And you can find me across social media at Hardman, spelled H4RDMAN. Well, Bill and Tim, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Derek, thank you again for helping me with the questions. And thank you to our listeners and viewers for joining us on the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we focus on real Canadian rugby. We hope you can join us again next time.